I'm a little nervous.
Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately titled IPA USA. IPA USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association, and as part of our efforts to promote play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats, which are now going into podcasts. And these are conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find all the Porch Play Chats, and there's over 180 of them, on our website at ipausa.org. Up in that top right-hand corner, follow us on, I always have to remember this, follow us on Instagram, be a friend on Facebook, or subscribe to the YouTube channel, and magically, every Monday morning, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA, and with me on the porch is Mike Cooper.
Hi.
Mike is the co-host of the podcast Teaching with the Body and Mind and the author of so many books, and I'm going to talk about them. Mike has dedicated his life to serving families and children in the field of early childhood. He's not that old. He's been in the early childhood teacher since 1992, and he's currently the director of curriculum at Rise Early Learning Center. He's the author of Embracing Rough and Tumble Play, Teaching with the Body and Mind, and Inclusion Includes Us, which is now a textbook in one of my courses because it's so wonderful, as well as 6 picture books, including The Amazing Erik. He's presented to thousands about the importance of big body play for children and everything else, and is a regular on Porch Play Chats. And so today, Mike is going to talk to us about why is it so hard to talk about play? I think it's a great title.
Yeah, I know. And it is hard. I mean, so I'll tell you how I came up or figured out this is the problem for me. I'm was working on a new book proposal, and I was talking about how play, especially pretend play, has this dynamic relationship with children's cultural identity development and gender identity development. And I use the word dynamic, meaning that what the child already understands about their culture influences what they choose to play. And then playing, affects their cultural identity. And the same with gender. Oops, I always bump into my mic at least once in these. And then I started talking to people that I taught, 15, 20 years ago about the play I remember them doing, and hearing about their own cultural identity, gender identity, and things. And it was just very interesting, right? So that having one person who identifies as non-binary talking about they did princess play because they really liked the costumes. They had better costumes and props. And they didn't really relate in a way they felt their friends really related to being a princess or, that. And they were saying, the costumes, felt nice and it was fun to twirl. And so it's just like, oh man, like, because what happens when you start talking about play, whether you talk about it like how it helps children learn or about how it affects their identity or anything, it makes it sound like it's this linear process of you play and then this thing happens. And so that's where I was stuck. And then I saw this Unitarian minister telling a story to kids, and it was like, that's exactly it. So he was talking about the fact that, and only later did I find out what he was coming from. So I'll go in the order that I discovered this. He was talking about the way that you have to be in something. You have to go deep. So you are in love, but you're not in like. You can be in shock, but not surprise. You can be in awe, but not in startled. Like this idea, there's something more. And then he said, the things that are going to change the world are only in those places where we go deep. And right away, I was like, that's what play is. In play, you go deep. So yesterday I was talking to him about that story and things, and he's like, oh yeah, I was just trying to find a way to explain let me get the name right, Maurice Merleau-Ponty's perceptions of phenomenology to kids. I was
And
like,
you're
oh, is that
like,
all you were doing? Right.
oh, is that all? Okay. All
So
right.
then I
That's
had to go
easy.
into that, into his work a little bit. And I am not a philosophy major. I'm assuming a lot of the people watching this aren't either. So it was easier for me to understand from the foreword that explained what Merleau-Ponty added to the philosophical world in 1945. And listen to this, because this sounds to me like what we talk about when we talk about play. Language deepens and transforms our experience, but only by expanding, refining, and varying the significance we have always already found in situations and events before we find it in sentences, thoughts, inferences, concepts, and conversations.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there we go.
So it's you do it first, and then you can put words to it. And actually, the way KP Hong, the minister that I saw speak, said it is, you can look at a rectangle, you can understand the length, you can understand the width, but to understand the depth, you have to participate. You have to go into it three-dimensionally. When you're just on the outside, you only understand the surface. And that's what happens with play, I think, that even those of us who've been doing this for years, I could never tell you what the child I was watching play the other day. Like one child came up to me on Monday, one of my last days at my last job, and asked if I would play lasagna with her. And I had no idea what lasagna was. And, in her head, she had this whole thing, and I'm trying to understand the game. And then someone else tells me, oh, she saw some other kids playing zombie, but she didn't know the word. So she calls it lasagna, but it's basically chase.
Right. And because lasagna may be something she eats at home.
Yeah. But it was just that thing of like, I can't understand even, a kid, and who knows what she's getting out of it. Because I think some kids probably are getting, it's just the chase part of it. And some people are, interested or intrigued on the idea of dead coming to life, or, the horror element. And other kids are just interested because kids are laughing when they play it. So they want to play too, just this. And there's not any one answer, because actually for each kid, it's probably all of those to a certain degree. And no matter how long I'm in this field, I'll never understand. I can never be the other person. But what play does is you're totally immersed. And only later, I don't know if this metaphor is good. I used it, that early childhood nerd this week of, it's like watching someone swim, like going deep. So that idea, watching, and then afterwards explaining what their hand did. That's the type of thing of like, oh, here's the math they learned in that play. Or you could take like what their legs did. Oh, here's what their language skills were in that play. And they're all true, but they never explain the joy of swimming, the way you feel after it, the way you feel during it. For adults, maybe sometimes it's like, oh, I really don't want to get out of bed and go to the pool before work. So there's that. But for kids, usually it's just joyful. I was the shy kid, and I was always nervous about if the water's going to be too cold. So
I'm still nervous about that.
Yeah. So, but it's just like, it doesn't, there's no way to talk about play that explains everything. But when I found, the little bit I've read so far of phenomenology, it was like, oh, it really was capturing now what we think of as that brain body connection.
Yes.
I mean, his whole point is that, that I think, therefore I am, is this assumption that just thinking is what makes you real. And he's like, no, you're a body, and it's not, you don't have a body, you are a body. You don't have thoughts, you are your thoughts. And I just thought it was a helpful way to think about play, and I'm only on the beginning part of like thinking more about it. So wanted to come here and talk about it with you.
I know. And I think what's lifted up to me is I don't know if I told you this story because it was an aha moment for me when I did Porch Play Chats in the last recording group. So we were talking about how children's play can, just like the non-binary child that you were talking to, or the adult now, we were talking about how play and what children are interested in can sometimes be something that they are interested in, and then, no, I'm not interested anymore, or I'm really interested in this, and no, or I'm really interested in this, and that sort of is the path, right, that they take. We build and build and build and provide more and more opportunities based on what they're interested in to let them figure it out, right?
Right.
And so when we lived in Germany, when Rod, the 45-year-old, was 6 months old is when we got there. And we were there for 3 years, and we were in Air Force housing on the German economy.
Yep.
And so, we had an apartment, and it was small, and the kitchen was like this, and the refrigerators in Germany, are like this big. I mean, because you go and you shop every day because everything's fresh.
Right. Yep.
Right. But in the kitchen, Rod was crawling by that point, and he was always wanting to be in the kitchen with me, which was lovely, but it was small, and the stove was tiny, and I was worried. And so and there was no way I'd give him toys right outside the door. No, he wanted to be in the kitchen. So, okay, I had a drawer and a cupboard with all the plastic stuff in it that he could reach and open and pull out. And I gave him wooden spoons, and he'd bang them and do all his learning schemes right together in the kitchen while I was cooking. And I never made the connection that he was a drummer in his middle and high school years, in marching band. And so you never know, right? You never know.
I was actually also a drummer, and my mom also had a cabinet, which I only later learned. She's like, I kept the plastic stuff down there because I knew you're going to get into something, and that's the one I just let you do. And so I was banging on things
like
all the time.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
That's something that he did before he was like 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, maybe up to 2.
Right.
Influenced his interests.
Yeah.
Later on. And so I find that fascinating.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say about it for me is it's a very adult way, right? To say, oh yeah, I did that and then I drummed. But what I'm still fascinated with is by the way things sound. And so when I go for a walk in the woods, I do it all the time. I'll pick up a stick and I'll kind of hit the different logs. And if it's like, especially dead logs, and if it's rained, they sound different than if they're dry, and and I still do that all the time. Like, what does this thing sound like? In fact, someone at my last job when I first started said she always knew I was coming down the hall because I tapped everything. And I also now kind of understand it as being ADHD stimming too. But when I do it, I'm always hitting specific points, like when there's cubbies in the hallway. I want to hit right in the middle of the cubby where it has the most resonance, not near one of the joists or whatever. And I don't even consciously think of it, but I'm doing it all the time. Or the railing, I know, like I'm tapping it and I know it's going to be ringing because it's a metal railing. But as I get closer to the end where the post is, it's deadening the sound a bit. And I don't know what it is, but that is still a thing for me. I don't drum like musically, like with anyone or anything. I mean, people will tell you I drum on my steering wheel when I listen to music, but that's different. But I'm not like, I don't think of myself as a musician anymore in that sense of actively seeking out other people to play music with and all that. And yet I guess I would use the word play. I play with sound all the time.
And then so I just want to, I'm going to switch this for just a second because I just want us to think based on what Mike just said. When we tell children their hands have to be by their sides when they're walking down the hallway,
Yeah.
when we restrict children from doing things that we don't think are appropriate when they're not really doing anything that's inappropriate.
Right. Yep.
So what are you doing with what
Right.
is it within you that is preventing you from allowing children to have that sensory input in
Right.
in the way that they need it? I'm just trying to, I hum all the time.
Uh-huh.
And I talk to myself. So, and I answer. So, but I'm an auditory learner. Are you an
Right.
auditory learner?
I am definitely auditory. Yeah.
Yeah. So I tell people, really, if you ask yourself questions and answer, you're not crazy. You're just an auditory
Right.
learner
There you go. Nice.
because that's how we process, right?
Right.
And so, if a child is kinesthetic tactile and they need that sensory input all the time and you're preventing them from doing that, they're going to find it in a way that you don't like
Right.
because you're taking away what they need. And
Right.
so just another thing to think about in our daily interactions with children.
Yeah. And that's definitely something, because he actually, Marcel Merleau-Ponty does talk about sensory. Like, it's really interesting because he's saying it's senses as well as movement, which I thought was really interesting. But what he didn't have the understanding of is what we know now around neurodiversity and the differences in sensory profiles and all of that. That language came later because it's easier to understand the thing that fits you or fits your schema of what school is, because often people who get attracted to be teachers have that in their mind of what school is that most kids don't have. And that idea of humming, tapping on things, all those things don't fit that typical schema. But when people have more of an understanding of, everyone's going to whatever, be in the world, exist in the world differently. And thinking about that in some ways, what I've been, I guess, coming to realize more is just broadening that definition of play, that tapping while you're walking down the hallway fits most of Peter Gray's definition of play.
Yeah.
It's
joyful.
It's joyful. You're choosing to do it.
Yeah.
It's like kind of for its own, the
Purpose.
pleasure, the way I just described the sound, the different sounds that I hear when I walk, like that, it fits everything to do with play.
It does.
And yet, I wouldn't have defined it as play before meeting all these other IPA USA folks and things, Well,
and I think what's so interesting about what you said is that I remember when I was playing at home, I had been in public school. I had my chalkboard and I had my chalk and I lined up all my babies in rows, right? And I was the teacher, and and so sometimes I think people think that that's what they should be doing, and when we say children, when children play, they are developing all of these wonderful things that are going to help them learn. They're learning, but they're going to build on that learning later when their brains are ready for it, right? But if you are the teacher and you feel like you have to be the director of all learning, really robbing children of that opportunity to get those foundational things that they need to be able to learn later. So it is just, why is it so hard to talk about play?
Right.
Because I think sometimes they don't feel like they're being seen as a professional.
Right.
Because they are not really quite sure. And this is just what I hear people say. Well, how do I describe what they're doing as learning? I said, it's easy, right? You document, you take language samples, you observe, you do developmental checklists, you align it with state standards. I mean, and then I'll tell one more story about what I do with my college students. So my college students in the curriculum and assessment course, I said, so tonight for the first 45 minutes of class, you can, and I had lots of loose parts in the room. I had brought in buckets of them. And I said, you can choose to, you know, play anywhere you want to play. And you've got 45 minutes and you can play by yourself. You can play with someone else. You can, whatever you choose to do, play. And they're used to playing with me now. So they're like, okay, she wants us to play, so we better get busy, right? So they're figuring out all their stuff and they're playing. And then 45 minutes later, I mean, it was amazing what they had done. And 45 minutes later, I said, okay, are you ready to stop? No, I'm not finished yet. Okay, well, you can have 15 more minutes, right? And so, and then 15 more minutes later, are you ready? No, I need 10 more minutes. Okay, 10 more minutes, right? So, and then I finally said, okay, you have to stop. We've talked 45, we've added 25 more, so you're done. And then I said, okay, I want this table to look at the social emotional standards, and I want this table to look at the math standards, and this table to look at science, and this table to look at approaches to learning, this table to look at language and literacy, and this table to look at social studies, and this, you know, and creativity, right?
Yeah.
And I said, and then just I want you to just write down which standards it was that you just did.
Right.
Just for your content area. And so they did that. And then I went over to the whiteboard and I said, okay, let's start with approaches to learning. And they gave me like 4 standards. And then let's go to language and literacy. And they had 8 standards. And
right.
Let's go to math. And they had, I think, 5 or 6 standards.
Right.
Anyway, went on and on through every content.
Yeah.
And at the end, it was 41 standards.
Right. And that's like, to me, that's why I find that idea of like you engage in play. So it's again that deep thing, and you would do a worksheet or you do a lesson about social skills, or you would do like, but you have 41 different things. And I think that idea of like feeling like we have to justify what we do, that's where I feel like, okay, now we can, you know, just put in, as you know, we are aware of with the perceptions of phenomenology, a person has to participate to fully understand something, right? And, you know, people do this, you know, in later grades too, like even in high school, right? With the kids who go out and do things, you know, like you don't just learn about theater, you do theater, you get a chance to go, even if it's only because of coordination, like you do one day where you go on a field trip to like, what would it be like to have this job or whatever. There's still, I think, in some ways, an understanding that the immersion, you know, and I guess, you know, language immersion is a obvious idea of it. There's a difference between Spanish immersion and taking a Spanish class.
Yeah.
And everyone knows it. But the truth is that all learning, you should call it a learning immersion class or whatever. And you know, I'm definitely one of these people. Richard Cohen's voice is coming in my head right now of when I say learning, it's not just because the other trap we fall into is that learning is then the sciences and we're only training engineers and that's usually the way we justify them. Even schema play theory is usually focused on things that are very mechanical or the physical sciences. And just as important is the social things, the philosophical things, like all of those things that children are going to do, and hopefully they'll do several of them. Right? Like maybe the only engineering they do is every time they move apartments, they have to get their couch out the door. That's fine, you know. Just that, but just that idea that I think the trap we fall into, if we have to justify that, we're justifying it by only how are they going to become engineers,
right?
And the truth is I always hold up my cell phone when I do this because we're old enough to remember when these things didn't exist.
Right.
It only exists because people weren't thinking about the things that already exist. They were making connections between things that didn't exist. They did take the idea. I even remember when, wait, what if you had your phone is also the thing you could look up things, like just that idea that all these different things that now we take for granted, someone at some point had to think, oh, what about that? Like what if all those things were in one place?
And let's just go back to curiosity,
Yeah,
initiative, exploration, discovery,
yeah,
getting pleasure from it, wanting to repeat it.
right,
Oh my God. So it goes back to Bruce Perry's learning cycle.
yeah,
It's not ABCs and 1, 2, 3s,
right,
but play.
yep,
Right. So so people had to be creative, problem solvers, critical thinkers, everything that we want
right,
children to grow into. But I do think that, and I always go back to the red shirting in kindergarten. My God, please do not be planning for their middle and high school years
right,
when they're in kindergarten, because you have no clue
right,
where this child is going to go. You have,
yeah,
and so when you're trying to pigeonhole them
yep,
in it, we're going to keep you out a year in kindergarten so that you can be bigger
right,
and play sports when you get to middle or high school. I always look at families and say, why would you be deciding their future for them?
right. And even the sports metaphor, there's plenty of people, involved in sports that talk about the importance of before the age of 12, don't have the child only play one sport.
Yeah.
Because what happens is by the age 20, their body is already worn out, especially if it's like pitching and baseball or, things that
golf.
the more you do,
Tiger Woods.
yeah, the more you do,
yes,
the more your body is able to, in the long run, you might choose a sport that you're going to focus on and really, gymnastics is another one, right? Where it tends to be people are pigeonholed real young, and there aren't many 30-year-old gymnasts, and people live a lot longer than that. I can say that now.
yes.
But yeah, so that's that thing of we shouldn't be we're not training people to be 22-year-olds.
No.
I hope that what we're doing, my ultimate goal is that when children are in their 80s, they have stories to tell. And I, because I used to bring a preschool class to a nursing home, and we'd always do this thing in July, having the kids ask the grandfriends about kindergarten as they got ready to go to kindergarten.
Nice.
And nobody's memory was about a math lesson. Nobody's memory was about anything. The only one that was academic was about reading. And it was, I learned to read, and that opened up a whole new world because I lived in a small farming town, and suddenly I could read about people all over the world. That was the only academic thing I ever heard over like the 10 years I used to do this. Only academic thing that any of the grandfriends brought up. It was mostly about, I snuck outside to the playground when I wasn't supposed to, but then I couldn't get back in because the door was locked. Or, like they were always about things that were like a little bit breaking the rules, or about meeting their best friend that they were then friends with for 60 years, or, like just these amazing stories. No one told us about the time they figured out how to subtract. Not that it's not an important thing, and there are times we all have to use it. But even that's just a skill, but the sense of what numbers do or what they mean is the important thing. And play can give you that.
Yes.
And that a worksheet can't really. And you can only read about it and understand it if you've have some schema or some experience to reflect on. And that's what I love about that sentence I used earlier about the language comes later. It's the experience. And I can remember it with math. I actually was really into physics as a high school student, but I mostly could equate things to when I used to throw the ball at the chimney to play, because I didn't have anyone to play catch with. And if I threw it sort of up, it went up higher. The angle of incidence equaled the angle of reflectivity, but I didn't have the words for it, but I knew, which way to throw it to make it go up and to make it go straight to me.
And that goes right back to prior knowledge, right? You have
Right.
to do it to gain the experience.
Yep.
And then you can build on it.
Right.
But if I'm not manipulating, exploring, using my body and my senses, and I'm just looking at a screen, or I'm flipping through an iPhone or an iPad, that's not the experiences that are going to build that prior knowledge.
Right.
And I'm only doing that because I see mom and dad.
Yeah. And one of my aha moments was I had a child whose mom was working with the government of Vietnam, and then his dad was from Germany. And so they often flew to these places. And when kids would find like a map or a globe or something, everyone else would be like, oh, that's, the fairyland, or that's, just have all these things. And he'd be like, oh, that's Vietnam. That's really hot. I remember one time, like, he could point to places like, Piaget would have said that he couldn't understand a map, but he could, because he actually went to these places. And of course, Piaget could not imagine a world where a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old is traveling like that. Yeah. And he knew what it was like to fly over the ocean, and he knew it by how long it felt. Right? Like, that's a thing you can't explain. So yeah, anyways, I could go on for a long time. I haven't been keeping track of time here, but
no, well, we're close. But
okay, yeah.
But I think what you have really brought up into our consciousness is that children have to do it in order to build that prior knowledge that they'll use forever. They have to make friends, play dress up. They have to do games outside when they're ready.
Right.
They have to manipulate and feel and move and repeat it over and over again. And through play.
Yeah.
In order
and the play,
and
you don't know which way the play will influence a lot of different things, like you were saying in that exercise. Because I'm going to give one more story too, that I had a child who, they were really interested in fire trucks and things, and we were mostly focused on a pumper truck. And we went to the fire station. It was very funny. They were going to give us the tour, and we had all the kids pulled out clipboards and like, we want to see your pumper truck. How, they started asking, how many ladders does it have on there? Where do you keep the hoses on it? Like, so they just showed the pumper truck, but the kids would play with, I just had the little pumps from hand lotion, things like that, attached to, the aquarium tubing or whatever, the clear PVC tubing or whatever it is called. And they would pump, and then I put colored water in so that they could see it go through the tube. And one of the children who was really into it eventually needed open heart surgery as a child. And when the doctor is explaining, the heart's a pump, and he's like, how am I going to explain this to a 5-year-old? And the child was like, oh, when something gets pumped, it pulls liquid through it. And like, he just started describing it. And I didn't think, okay, I need to teach all the kids how their, circulatory system works. But they experienced what a pump does. And so, and that could go 100 different ways. He could have been involved in an engineering thing or hydraulics or I don't know, like lots of different things. But what did it, so I guess that's the other part of it with play. While we sometimes have to single out those things after the fact, and I guess that's the big point, to justify it. But if we are only doing those things, then maybe we could say we don't need play. But because we are dealing with human beings who need full lives, play is the only way to get all of that, because it's experience.
And you never know what direction it's going to go.
And you don't know which direction. That's, yeah.
I mean, so don't have an end in mind, right?
Right.
You don't have to teach a life lesson. You just need to allow them to live.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't teach a life lesson. Let them experience life.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like as
Okay.
always, absolutely wonderful. Don't go anywhere while I close this out.
Yep.
So to learn more about IPA USA, please visit our website at ipausa.org. And until next time, keep on playing.